Hi all, as you've guessed, my name is Matt from Ratho Quarter, and this is the fourth installment in my mix walkthrough video series where we look at the mixing of my track Basilisk. This week we'll be taking a look at how I approached mixing the guitars. I hope you enjoy it. Cheers. Okay, so here we are again in Studio One to take a look at the mixing of the distorted rhythm guitars for my track Basilisk. The song is quad-tracked, which you can see is represented by these 4 yellow bars, and what I have done is I have panned 2 of them, like hard panned 2 of them, and then the other 2 are kind of slightly more inboard of that. I've treated this in a very like symmetrical way, I suppose. So I have in either side of the stereo image, I've got kind of exactly the same thing going on. So I've got like one set of guitars with an archetype nollie plugin on them, and they're panned. One is panned right and the other is panned left, and then the other set is a kind of like more complicated kind of setup with the Forza Nameless, and again one is panned hard left and hard right. And I think I probably had the kind of more like upper focused, slightly noisier sounding guitars pushed further out, and then the kind of cleaner, maybe slightly darker sounding guitars a little bit inboard of that. And the idea is to try and create just like a big wall, really fill up that spectrum with this. Obviously it's a single note riff, so you kind of want like a big chunky sound to this, and that's the idea. Some producers will do a thing where they have 2 on either side of the stereo image. They have very different kind of guitar tones. I think I'm going to try that with maybe one of my next mixing projects and see how it goes. With my previous projects, and certainly with this one, I've kind of gone with more of like a symmetrical assignment of the tone, if you like. So this is the section we'll be listening to. Here it is in context. And I mean, that riff has been played on my YouTube channel more times than I care to remember. But what we'll do, let's just turn off all the processing and we can just step through it. So I'll solo this out, and this is it in isolation with all the processing. So tell you what we'll do is we'll turn off everything on the master bus. All 4 of these guitars are going directly to this master bus, guitar rhythm. And then here are the quad track guitars. So what I will do is maybe turn these guys off. And just for the sake of clarity, let's center this up. And also let's turn off all the plugins initially, or rather we'll just listen to one soloed guitar. So that's what literally one of the kind of hard pan guitars sounds like, just with its own processing. So let's turn that all off, and you should just have a guitar DI. So obviously that's the DI signal of my Sub-Zero Rogue 6 like baritone 30-inch guitar. And then what I've done, I think for the mixing of these, I kind of considered these 2 guitars to be the more prominent of the quad track guitars. I think they're all probably at the same volume, but it's possible that these 2 are a little bit louder in the mix generally. What I wanted to do, I mean, firstly, one of the reasons why I chose this Forza Nameless was because I was a bit concerned that some of my previous guitars, rhythm guitars, had sounded like a little bit polite, and I wanted something a bit more gnarly and a bit more aggressive sounding. I believe that the Forza Nameless was a really good choice for the super low tune stuff, and also just for something a bit more gnarly sounding, so I went with that. Anyway, the way I approached this was kind of just copying a technique that I saw online used by a producer and guitarist and drummer called Buster Oderholm, Swedish producer for Viljarda and Humanity's Last Breath. And this is a cool thing he does where he kind of, it's almost like he's, if you imagine in a more kind of like live context, it's almost like he's putting a boost pedal into an amplifier. So your signal goes from your guitar to the boost pedal to the amplifier. But what he's doing is introducing a step of like EQ between the boost pedal and the amp. So that's kind of like what he does. And he's also kind of like able to blend. I've not done it exactly that way, but he's able to kind of like blend how much of that boost pedal is like a wet and dry. So he can kind of blend how much of the original DR and how much of the DR affected by the boost pedal is going into that amp. I thought that was kind of like a pretty cool thing to try. Like often I just end up slapping a kind of preset on there, but this time I really wanted to try this kind of slightly more intricate technique. So if I open up the plugins that we've got, you can see that I've loaded up this Fortin Nameless suite, and all I've got activated is the pedal section. The amp is turned off and the speaker cab is turned off. I've got the Zool noise gate, and I actually have the real version of this noise gate, which I really like. It's awesome. And then this has got the grind pedal enabled, and those are kind of dialed to taste effectively. But what this is doing is this is like just the boost pedal and no other processing. So this won't make it sound like anything special. But obviously it's doing quite a lot, I guess. So you can kind of hear immediately that's like kind of like, I guess, makes it a little bit more mid-focused and takes out some of the low end, which, you know, kind of oddly with something that's tuned so low that that's kind of what you want in a way. Then, kind of mimicking what Buster did, I mean, honestly, a lot of this processing or a lot of these EQ moves are super subtle. And I had, you know, my very untrained ear kind of almost struggled a little bit to match what he was doing, or at least completely understand what he was doing in terms of what he was trying to get rid of and what he was trying to accentuate about the DI. Because the way he had approached this is basically he'd have the amp engaged. So you can see this is like the next thing in the chain. First I've got effectively my boost pedal, then I've got some EQ processing, and then I've got the amp and the cab. So it's getting boosted. Then that DR signal, that boosted DR signal is getting shaped by the EQ, and then it's hitting the amplifier and the cab. He would basically make these EQ moves with this engaged. Honestly, like, yeah, I sometimes found it a little bit hard to hear what it was doing, so we won't get too into it. I think effectively what the goal is to like scoop out some of this mid, which sounds a bit more like nasally or like a bit congested and a bit like lacking in clarity, and then maybe boost some kind of critical high end a little bit that gives you maybe more of like an attacky kind of sound, and then get rid of some of the scratchy unpleasantness that comes from this sort of an approach. And then I think there's obviously a little bit kind of around where the snare drum would be, just clearing out some of that slightly lower mid, I guess. So yeah, let's just take a listen. I mean, really, it's incredibly subtle and kind of hard to hear what that EQ is doing on its own. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the Fortin Nameless Suite now, which is the amp and the cab. Obviously, you can see the pedal section in this instance is turned off. So if we turn that on, I mean, it definitely sounds like quite ugly and quite gnarly, I would say, which is sort of what I was going for on this one. I've been a bit concerned that my previous approaches to this kind of thing have been a tiny bit too polite sounding, and I wanted it to sound a bit more ugly and a bit more heavy. We'll see if we can hear a difference here. Yeah, I mean, it is a tiny bit more scooped, I suppose. It's a tiny bit more scooped sounding. It's just kind of clearing out some of this, like, congested part of the sound. And honestly, when I was watching the kind of walkthrough that he does, he spends a lot of time on this, and he like dials it in a way which I am just not qualified or have the ears to be able to do. So a part of it was like mimicking what he was doing, but then another part of it was me just trying my absolute best to hear if it was actually improving things, and not make, obviously I wasn't making exactly the same moves as him, because my DI and the guitar and what I was going for were all quite different to what he was dealing with. So I ended up doing things a little bit different, and I was trying my absolute best to be able to just hear the kind of micro adjustments that this was making. Let's just listen one more time. It's maybe a bit harsher, but it sounds a bit clearer, a little bit more articulation. Let's see if we can solo out some of these and see what they're doing. It's almost like kind of like mid sweep on a wah-wah pedal or something, that frequency. Yeah, so that's getting rid of some of that like more scratchy, slightly higher, unpleasant stuff. I mean, on its own, that doesn't sound amazing either, but I guess that's like a little bit, I don't know, just like a little bit more tack and slightly like a higher part of the guitar signal that is actually useful. Okay, so moving on. So yeah, as I've said before, your boost pedal, your EQ, and then your main like amp and cab section. What did I do after that? I think I've added another EQ just to like more precisely take out a couple of the slightly harsher frequencies in this. So let's have a quick look and I'll solo those out. Yeah, okay, that's just like a kind of just an ongoing whistle. It's not that offensive, I suppose, but perhaps I just felt like that it needed to come out after sweeping through the signal. Again, a slightly unpleasant whistling that just occurs throughout the whole part of the riff. And same with that. And so you should be able to hear a difference here. Just kind of like gets a tiny bit darker because some of those slightly more offensive frequencies disappear. Okay, so obviously this guitar is hard panned left, which is exactly the same as this one that is hard panned right. So with those two together, and then if I introduce the archetype nollie part of the signal too, which is the slightly more inboard guitars, we can hear everything together. It's interesting, like listening back to this in this way. It's like the guitar sound almost seems to like jump forward and just be a little bit more present and a little bit more. It just occupies a little bit more space and shouts a little bit more loudly with these extra, slightly more inboard panned guitars. Let's see what I was doing here. I mean, often with this archetype nollie, I just slap a preset on there. Yeah, this kind of walkthrough series is often me just slapping presets onto the signal and being done with it. Yeah, so this one I'm using a thing called the D word, which if I was to guess, I'd say is probably based on a diesel amp. And then obviously, again, I'm using the kind of like standard EQ that comes with Studio One. And I'm just getting rid of a lot of the low-end stuff just to kind of clear out the mud. Let's maybe solo those for the fun of it and see what we hear. Yeah, you can hear a kind of like low presence to it that arguably is a bit unwelcome when it's in the context of the mix. So, with all that done, I hope that stuff kind of like made sense. The boost pedal, EQing the DI, hitting the amp, and then a little bit of EQ processing after that. I hope that made sense, because like I do like this technique. I'll definitely be using this again, especially when stuff is tuned like super low like this. I highly recommend it. Absolutely love the Forza Nameless too, by the way. Like it just sounds incredible. Okay, and then looking at this master bus. So obviously this is with nothing on the master bus. And let's step through and see what I did. So turning this guy on. This is just some processing, which I think I probably was also paying attention to Buster's online tutorial walkthrough thing that he did, just to kind of wrap my head around how to approach this kind of EQ. He does something very similar. Again, he spends quite a lot of time on it, and he's an incredibly sophisticated, highly skilled producer, which I'm none of those things, but yeah, I was just trying to go through a similar kind of exercise to what he does and learn something from it. You can see there's kind of like there's a dynamic EQ here, which is like pushing down in the area of the kick drum, and just clearing out a bit of the stuff where like the kick drum and the snare drum are going to be important. So like the 100 hertz and the 200 hertz, trying to just clear out some stuff there. Obviously clearing out the super low stuff, which you just don't really need, and is probably taken care of by a bass and maybe more where the kick drum wants to live. And then there's also this like really nice thing, which obviously is like a nice feature of the FabFilter Pro EQ, but I'm sure you could kind of do this kind of like EQ move that like shifts it and just kind of like pushes the higher frequencies up and drops the lower frequencies down. And that was something that I was feeling was quite important for this, that just the sound was a bit too dark and I just wanted to be a bit more present, a bit more in your face. Okay, maybe it starts sounding a little bit more harsh, whatever. That's kind of the idea. Like I wanted the guitars to announce themselves a little bit more. Like this is a guitar song for me. It's like really important that they were kind of really present in the mix. So let's just have a listen with this one engaged. I mean, you can hear it straight away that like before this is in place, that low end is kind of like a weird, low, tangled mess. Yeah, I mean, it really is super clear to me anyway. And then once you engage that and clear out some of that garbage, it definitely sounds better and just a bit clearer. There's loads of stuff going on there, like that would cause problems with drums and bass. And then also just clearing out the super top end. So let's just solo out a couple of these and we can see what they sound like. Like with some of these amp sims, stuff up there just sounds super digital anyway. And obviously this stuff down here, you can hear that's not useful to us. It's like underwater guitars. Okay, then what did I do? It's just like another EQ doing some similar stuff. Like, again, taking away more low ends. Yeah, there's some in there, so obviously it doesn't hurt to do it twice. And then a bit of notching, getting rid of some annoying stuff. Let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, fair enough. Just some annoying whistling frequencies. And then I've done this kind of thing again where I'm like, just like boosting the top end. So like all of that, which is actually kind of not altogether unpleasant sounding, just like a nice kind of crispy top end to the guitar, and something which is like where the guitar is going to, the stuff that's useful in the mix that the guitar is doing. So like really nice to just kind of accentuate that, but then maybe like pull out some of these annoying frequencies, and then once again like kind of low passing it for the super high level content. Slightly more subtle, that one. And then this, I mean, okay, like part of this walkthrough is like me showcasing like plugins, which maybe some people don't have. And realistically, I probably shouldn't have spent quite as much money on some of these plugins as I have, but they help, and they help make things sound good. But like, this is the FabFilter Satin, which I really am starting to enjoy. I didn't like understand it very much, and I still use it in an incredibly basic way, but it's basically just like it's like a saturator. You know, it adds like kind of like distortion effectively. I mean, you can even use this as an amp sim, and I've made bass tones like that where I'm literally just using the FabFilter Satin as the thing to make the amp sound. But like in this song, and I use it quite a lot, you could probably get the same kind of results as you would with this tool with other saturator plugins. I have used a kind of, I can't remember what the software company was called, but they made a free saturator plugin, and like it was fine. It sounded pretty cool. Like, you know, the really cool thing about this one is you can obviously like partition different parts of the frequencies, different parts of the signal, and like apply you can apply effects to those individual parts of the frequency spectrum, if you like. I end up using this to like shape the sound and like add warmth and add a little bit more grit, and again bring the guitars forward and like push them a bit more forward and let them announce themselves a bit in the mix. I think you would probably struggle to get a free plugin that would allow you to like partition the frequencies in this way, but there would be other ways of doing that, and really the effect is often quite subtle, so sometimes you don't need an expensive plugin to achieve something decent, or at least something very similar to this. So let's just have a listen and see what it does. Okay, I mean, number one, it's getting louder, but then like it's also like boosting a lot of mid. So this is just using kind of like the default setting, which has this warm tape, and I'm using that, that's going to add a certain amount of drive and a certain amount of like harmonic stuff that just enhances it and adds some grit to the sound, and will ultimately also boost the volume to a degree. And then you can kind of like boost or lower the volume effectively, like the wet and dry of these different areas of the spectrum. So you can kind of like further shape how this sounds. So just stepping through the different bands here, like on the low stuff, for this warm tape, it's not doing anything. So that shouldn't change. Basically that should stay as it is, and the level has not changed either. Then for this kind of like middle section, which is like 250 to 700. So I don't know, maybe an area where you would scoop out a little bit. You can see I've not changed anything in terms of level, and I do have the warm tape drive on almost 100%, 99.9, which I think might actually be a default setting. I'm surprised to see that, to be honest. I'm wondering if that's a mistake. If we solo this out, I mean, that sounds quite gnarly, and that's obviously a lot of like drive to add to that particular part of the sound. Obviously, we're listening to this guitar signal in isolation. I was probably doing it in the context of a mix, and it's entirely possible that I thought that was necessary and that sounded good. I'm a little bit surprised to see this there. It's entirely possible this is a mistake and it's ended up in the song, and that's what it is. But you can see this is an area where I focused on. So we've got like 45% drive, and it is from 700 to 4000. So like kind of like, the exciting part of the guitar sound, arguably. And I've also boosted the volume quite a lot. So this is going to add a lot. So I love this plugin. I think you could probably do something similar with cheaper plugins, but it's worth checking out this guy anyway. And then here I think we've probably just got, I seem to have done this like at every step is like boosting this part of the signal. I guess I was just conscious of the guitars not being a big enough feature in the mix, because it is, it's not a very like complex riff, it's not very intricate, and it's basically just like based on chords. It's just like arpeggiated chords. That's ultimately all it is. And maybe I was trying to overcompensate or something, so I just kept on boosting this part, but then again taking out little annoying bits of the frequencies. So let's just have a quick listen. Yeah, fairly subtle, but you can kind of hear what that's doing there. Okay, so that is the main distorted rhythm guitars. I am not sure if I will even bother looking at the cleaner arpeggiated guitars because they're very uncomplicated. I didn't do very much with them at all. I've used an archetype Nolly preset for those, I think. This is obviously where most of the work went in because this is kind of more of a feature of the song. I hope that was all useful to you and you got something out of that. I think the next one I do will probably be looking at vocals, which should be interesting because that's definitely the part in terms of performance that I'm least confident about. And the mixing is like the most experimental that I would do with a project like this. Anyway, see you later. Cheers. Oh, smoked it.